Okay, we are live. All right, well, welcome back, Jeff. We are here for the second session of the year. We're kicking off. We are finally done with Palia.
Mm-hmm.
That was what, 6 sessions I think we did with her.
We did, yes.
Yeah, we are here for the second session. Turn my kicking off. We're finally done. Okay. So this time we are working on "Hatred of Democracy" by Jacques Rancière.
Yes.
Rancière.
Yes.
And I guess I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, so he wrote this book originally in 2005, I guess partly in reaction to what was happening in Iraq, the second Gulf War. And he claims to have detected a new modern hatred of democracy, one that is it's really quite recent, actually. And he contrasts this with older hatreds of democracy. So the hatred of democracy is as old as Plato. Plato was very upset that a democratic mob or trial or something killed his mentor Socrates. And it seems at every stage of Western history there's been some sort of hatred or despisement of democracy, and democracy itself was originally a slur. Um, so all of that's there, but he seems to detect a new one in our modern world. It's not directed so much at the institutions of democracy. Sorry, I'm hearing echoes. Am I doing something wrong here?
Yeah, that's my fault. That's my fault. I'm hearing a lot of noise from your end, though, I think.
Nothing else here. It might be the engine on the motor in my computer keeping it cool.
Oh, well. Keep going.
All right, so this new hatred of democracy is a modern manifestation, whereas in the past people have hated democracy because they believe that the normal person can't or shouldn't be ruling. That there's a whole set of people who are inspired to rule or given divine right or have the upbringing or the education for that. It's always been looked at as kind of a negative thing, and so they've been trying to limit it.
Democracy.
Yes, democracy. But in the new modern hatred, we can't because it's the standard in a sense. But the hatred has expressed itself not towards the institutions of democracy, but rather at the expression of democratic society. So although you can have elections and you can have voting and you can have candidates that can change places, that's not being challenged in any way, shape, or form. But what is being challenged is that people shouldn't necessarily be expressing their democratic will outside of elections. That is, and when they do, if politicians listen to them, then they're being bad politicians. That's the new hatred of democracy.
Okay. So the new formulation, it makes it so that in reality, when politicians actually do listen to the people, that's treated as a negative.
Exactly, and the reason is because democracy. Well, I shouldn't say the reason, but the justification is that they have the democratic ability to choose their leaders, so they don't need to express their democracy at any other time except at the elections. And when politicians listen to the people in between elections, this is considered a negative because, well, for two reasons. First of all, the people's desires and demands are always insatiable. So if they ask, if you
They can't be satisfied.
yeah, this is the argument that's being given by haters of democracy. You shouldn't be listening to the people ever because, well, if you listen to them once, then you have to listen to them again and again and again, and you're going to bankrupt the state or you're going to do something crazy that will interfere with two things: the regime of property. In other words, the masses will take the property of the rich and redistribute it, or they will take the privilege of the privileged classes and take it away from them, make everybody equal.
And this is the fear of real democracy.
Of real democracy, exactly. So he puts it like this. The new hatred of democracy can be succinctly put. There is only one good democracy, the one that represses the catastrophe of democratic civilization. And what he means by civilization is all the supposed values that we have in civilization, in our present civilization, to be precise. So when, say, George Bush says that they hate our freedoms, that's why they're attacking us, this is an appeal to our civilizational values. We're supposed to be a free civilization, our civilization that values freedom, and so the opposite is, that's why they hate us. And this is one of the legitimate ways, according to the people who hate democracy, to channel the impulses of the people to war. So that's a perfectly legitimized one. Outside of war, the next best way to channel the direction of the political will of the people is towards consumer society and the selfish needs, or the looking out for oneself, essentially. That's the goal of a good democracy for people who hate democratic society. They want the people to be individualistic and focus entirely on their own self-interest. And if they can do that, then the only real goal that the only real concern that the democratic rulers have for the people is to expand their range of consumer choices. And as long as they can do that, everything should be just hunky-dory.
So it's keeping people individualized so that they're competing with each other in the rat race, I guess, and preventing any social movements.
Yes, that would be an example. That would be one example. You can also send them off to war. That could be, in a sense, a social movement. But as long as they're not expressing their desire to the government to do whatever they want. As long as the people aren't expressing what they desire to the government.
Now, okay, well then, what would he say as people? Someone might say that elections are an expression of the people. When John Kerry versus George Bush, that's the expression of democracy. When they
that's what they'd like you to think. So the elites want. They don't challenge the institutions. They challenge the expression of it. So you have these elites, George Bush and what is his first name?
John Kerry.
John Kerry. Thank you. These guys were elites. The vision that they have is marginally different.
Both went to Yale.
Yeah, they're products of the system that espouses this particular form of democracy in quotes, and they're not going to change the system. They're embedded in the system. Their campaign. So one of the things that he says.
Then couldn't you argue that it maybe not changing anything is the expression of the people? That's what they would.
Well, yes, that's what good democracy is. It preserves the right of property and the power of the elites.
Okay.
So a real democracy is an existential choice, and it does allow for the changing of the system. If you don't have that, then you don't really have a choice. It's like offering you would you like Coke or Pepsi? They're both soft drinks, right? Yeah. I mean, you might have a preference, but ultimately they're both soft drinks, and it's not like you're choosing water or wine or beer or Gatorade. It's Coke or Pepsi, and that's what the elites would like you to be thinking, that you have a choice and that you express it in an election, and the election is an institution of democracy, but it's rigged. So
rigged for preserving those systems and the property.
Precisely, yes.
Right.
So the actual tension is between the elites to see who actually has the power, but they're not going to change anything consequential for the people. And if the people get in the way and listen and start demanding their things, and that interferes with what they really want to do, which is keep and aggrandize their power and their property.
People in chat are noting the similarities with some of anarchist principles here.
Yes, you brought a few of those up. Yes, so there's quite a lot of this in here, as you were pointing out. He only uses the word anarchist or anarchic once, as far as I can remember. So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, if democracy is considered good by the haters of democracy only when it is able to direct the democratic will of the people away from actually changing anything in the system, and so that it preserves property and the privilege of the privileged classes.
Okay, so any other kind of democracy is considered a bad democracy.
Precisely, yes. And what most people would take as democracy is the expression of the will of the people. So no, that would be considered a very bad democracy, and that's the essence of the hatred. And so the elites
hate. So the elites hate democracy, but espouse their own kind of democracy.
Yes, so it's democracy of the elites, essentially, or it's more. No, he doesn't say that. It's a conflict between elites for control over the government. Okay, so in his first chapter, which he calls From Victorious Democracy to Criminal Democracy, he starts to point out some of the lessons that are taught in the media. And one of the big examples he gives is after the war in Iraq. He talked about how everybody was very gleeful and joyful to have democracy brought to Iraq and Saddam Hussein eliminated and removed. But within the subtext, and often played explicit, there was this caution. They've got democracy, but there's going to be looting at first. Or there was looting at first. This means that they have their freedom and all that, but they need good, strong government
to keep them in check.
Yeah. First to stop that looting, and then once they get their looting under control and they stop it, that kind of stuff, then they got to check it again. Because they don't. These are inexperienced lawmakers. They might ask for something that the government can't afford, like, universal health care or basic pharmacare or a basic income guarantee. These kind of things. They might start asking for that, and they can't do that. That would be like taking away the property of the ruling elites. So no, you can't have that. The message is saying, Greece, they were looking after their people too much, and that's why they had that crisis. And same with New Zealand. That's why they went bankrupt, and now they don't have any of the same social programs.
Well, Greece had a lot of problems.
Some of them were, the subtext from the hatred of democracy is that the Greek government listened to their people too much, promised them too much, delivered too much. It was unsustainable.
Didn't collect taxes. That was a big part of it.
That may have also been a part of it, yes. So nobody wants to pay the taxes, but they want all the services.
Right.
So the problem is you're listening to the people. That's the problem. So the subtext at all of these financial crises around the world is you need good, strong government that channels the will of the people away from what they want to what the elites want for them. And that might often be going to war or just, look out for yourself. Get the Coke or Pepsi that you really want.
So how have then the public at large been brainwashed into adopting the elite's version of democracy when it isn't real democracy? So
a lot of the characteristics of democracy have in a sense been misinterpreted. So he gives an interesting analogy. Apparently in the 1960s France, the hippies of those days, the liberal democratic hippies of those days, who were condemning authoritarianism at the time, have been reversed. The very arguments that they used to condemn authoritarianism are now being used to condemn democracy. As an example of authoritarian or totalitarian governments are very whimsical. They want this, they want that, and they look at all the funny things that they make. And then they say now what they're saying is, can't listen to the people. They're always wanting something, and sometimes it's in contradiction to what other people want. So
right.
Right,
they can't be trusted.
They can't be trusted to be consistent. Whereas experts, they're consistent all the time, or they know what they're talking about. They know what's best. So, rule by experts is one form of a good democracy that they see. They give, in fact, 6 different titles and expert is one of them, that legitimate bad, what they would call good democracy, what people who support democracy would call bad democracy. And but that's the second chapter. Before we get there, the point that he wants to make in the first chapter is that there was a threefold process that flipped democracy and totalitarianism. So he claims that in the 1960s France, people understood better what they were fighting for better democracy. And what they identified as totalitarianism is what we actually have today. And we're calling that the evils of democracy, or the tyranny of the majority, or whatever other phrase you want to put in there. And so his process, according to him, the first thing is to reduce democracy to a form of society. For him, democracy is not society. But if you reduce it to a form of society, you move in that direction that you need to do that. And I'll make that clear in a second. I'll just go through the three points first. Second is to make this form of society identical to the reign of the egalitarian individual by grouping under the latter all sorts of desperate properties. Let me give tons of examples. So mass consumption, minority rights, union battles, all these kind of things become groups against groups within the society. So you're not looking at the common interest anymore. You're looking at the individual or the group interests versus the whole society.
This is sounding very Marxist now. We've gone from anarchist to Marxist. Because Marxism is all about class consciousness and the negation of in
that sense, yes.
You're right.
Yeah, go ahead.
And not thinking about things in terms of self-interest, in terms of identity groups or whatever.
Yes, he would agree that move towards thinking of identities, either individual or group, is negative in the form of real democracy. Because then it starts pitting, say, the lower classes or the lower groups, the non-elites, against each other, helping to legitimate the elite's desire not to have to listen to the people. But it gets more insidious than that, as we're about to see. So the third thing, third and finally, is to change the mass individualist society, which is now identical with democracy, with pursuing with the limitless growth that is inherent to the logic of capitalism. So instead of focusing in on the common good, we're again focusing on the individual. And now what we need and what they demand of us, or what they legitimately demand, what the ruling elites who hate democracy have forced the masses to adopt, is what they want them to adopt. And in this case, the continual expansion of the capitalist system, increasing markets at every step of the way.
So they've managed to redefine democracy in a kind of individualist ideology free of politics.
Yes, precisely. So that they can do the politics and we can just do the buying.
Right. So politics is for them. It's for the ruling class, for the elite class, the people who are meant for it. Politics cannot be handled by the masses. We're not responsible enough.
That's right. We don't have the education. We don't have the education. We don't have the breeding. We don't have the life history or whatever.
We're too whimsical.
Yes.
We get it wrong. Like them.
That's exactly what they're saying. Yes. So he contrasts this with the traditional, more traditional notion of democracy as the, quote, coming together in equality to find the common good. Coming together in equality, there's the remnant of that today is one vote, one person. But the coming together for the common good, that's what's changed. The common good, we no longer consider the common good. We are considering our own individual desires, needs, and wants.
Right. So
that's considered the common good now, and we want to expand that. But it's not the common good, because what you may want and what I may want are two different things, and we can fight about it, and that delegitimizes both our desires.
So we've been programmed to think that what's best for all is what's best for us.
For me, yeah.
For me. So therefore, maximizing my own self-interest through even scamming other people or doing whatever I need to get on top is actually the best thing I could do.
Precisely, yes.
For the group, for society.
Yes. So every politician in our society is corrupt, according to their system, according to Jacques Rancière, because we're self-interested. So I, as a local politician, he would view me as corrupt because I campaigned for my job. I went door to door and asked people to vote for me.
So just that act alone is...
That act alone has corrupted me right away because I've introduced self-interest into what ostensibly should be the common good. So any politician that ever asks for your vote is, from his perspective, corrupt, which means pretty much everybody in our society who's ever run or been either successful or failed to be successful has been a corrupted politician. Now, this is also very insidious because when we're looking for the common good, if we're paying politicians, they have a vested interest in getting reelected.
Right.
Right. One of the things he says is that the only qualified politician should be one who doesn't want to be a politician.
Have you seen Game of Thrones? I think I've asked you this.
I've watched a few episodes that don't see a connection. Yeah.
All right. Well, if chat will know if they've seen it, the very end of the show, they this concept is taken up.
Oh, okay. So in the modern world, there's really only, as far as I know, one place that actually has this, and that's the College of Cardinals. If you want to be a pope, you will not be a pope.
So nobody campaigns for being a
nobody.
pope.
If anybody suspects that you want to be the pope, you will not get any votes. That's apparently one of the conditions. So he sees in a democracy, the people who are actually making the decisions, the ruling class, the rulers at any one particular time, don't want to be there. They're not paid. They're not going to get reelected. It's like jury duty. You may not be able to get out of like he doesn't go too deep into the specifics, but the point is when you get called for jury duty, you didn't ask for it. You probably don't really want it. It's a duty that you do, and that this is the opportunity. This is where you really, literally, when you have nothing to gain from it, and a little bit to lose, in fact, that you are actually open to the common good. So I, as a low-level politician, get paid. So I have, according to him, I have an unconscious, well, in my case it's conscious because I've read this, but every politician has an unconscious understanding that if they resign or they quit or they don't get reelected, they're going to lose income. So all their decisions are, in a sense, touched upon by that self-interest. If you want to get reelected, you're thinking more about how to please the most likely to vote rather than the common good, so that you can keep your job. Because in the modern world, it is a job. He sees that as a corruption of democracy.
Now, I was going to bring this up in the meeting, but I didn't. Now, what about the idea that, we have a lot less corruption in Canada and the United States in our officials? You could argue precisely because they are paid as well as they are. Whereas you go down to Mexico or Nicaragua or wherever, their cops there, their officials don't make any money, so they almost have to be corrupt in order to live comfortably.
Yes, I think he's distinguishing between like police or bureaucracy or staff, as we would say, and the actual governance. So yes, in Mexico apparently, and in some other less or more corrupt countries, individual lawmakers may be able to siphon off actual money from the budget or something like that. We have rules against that, yes, and that's a very good thing, because that would be the natural inclination of people who are self-interested, and if they can get away with it, they probably would. So, but at the governance level, like what we would call elected politicians who actually set policy, are coming together for the common good. That's not a career job. It shouldn't even be a job from his perspective. It's something that you would come together for a short period of time, make the decision, and then get out. So one example that he gives of near or better, partly in better, I have to say, is the Florentine democracy. Now, there were problems with that in the Middle Ages and in the early Renaissance. The principle was that you put there'd be a certain number of jobs that needed to be done. You put names in a hat and you draw them out, and they would do that particular job. The principle there is that it's random. Nobody's campaigning for it. Now, it was corrupted in a different sense there, because apparently the Medici family controlled who gets put in the bag or something like that. But the principle is closer to the idea of jury duty, and that would make it a much more democratic, real democratic institution, democracy, because you're coming together for the common good, untouched by that personal interest. So in the modern world here in Canada, we have conflict of interest rules that try and prevent that. We have a separation of a whole bunch of other powers. These are ways to try and get around it, I shouldn't say try and get around it. These are ways to try and mitigate or minimize the harmful aspects of the selfishness that is involved in politics. They're not perfect, because people make mistakes and people are getting caught like this all the time.
But at least they're not incentivized to do bad things, or at least they're not self-motivated.
In the ideal sense, they wouldn't be self-motivated, but even as a politician, I'm thinking, like, I want to please the people, right? So I want to get reelected. I'm thinking I have to do a good job, because that's not necessarily considered a bad thing, and that's how the world works in our system. Now, what he's saying is that what we call democracy is really a corruption of the democracy, because we are still elites. Elections are not really free and fair. It's always a contention between the elites and who plays this game better, this game of cunning and resource management.
Well, can you still, you can argue that it's corrupted, but could you not say that because it is possible for non-elites to make it into governing positions, that negates what his theory is saying?
So as long as we do keep democracy, there's always that element of chance, but it's very rare. As examples of that, we look at, our prime minister happens to be part of a family that has been prime minister before.
Yeah.
There's only been a very limited number of prime ministers. You can see that there's a connection there. So of course there's going to be some. Like, I was a complete outsider when I got elected. I guess in that sense, but I've been corrupted by the system from his perspective, because I'm getting paid.
So then,
I campaign.
So from his perspective, does that make you an elite?
Yeah, I entered into that in a sense. I'm at the lowest level of the elite. I'm at the lowest level of politician in the country.
So you're Illuminati now. You're at the top. You're running things.
From his perspective, I'm at the lowest level of the top. Yes, of the political world, and he sees that as So my self-interest being, the option I have an option to get reelected and to continue to receive payment for this job that I do. There's a self-interest in there, and we're playing dumb if we don't recognize that. The fact that we keep getting there's a pension at the end of this as well, and
that's a big one.
Any politician who gets paid essentially has this corrupt nature of them. Mm-hmm.
Does anyone who make it into office get a does it? Sorry.
Your video is not coinciding with your words.
Oh.
Okay, now it's back. Now it's back.
Okay. Does anyone who gets on city council get a pension?
Yeah, it starts off pretty low, but there's pensions. Yeah.
Starts off low, but does it get?
I believe it's about 10 years in that it starts to become vaguely livable.
I should become a city councilor.
But anyway, if that's the reason you're staying in power, or you're
then I'm corrupted.
you're essentially corrupted, because the point of democracy is to come together in equality for the common good. When you start putting in your own personal needs, and there's acceptable ones, like legally. I mean, everybody knows that this is what's happening, but he says that it shouldn't even be like that.
Well,
so we have conflict of interest rules that are much less stringent than what he would be suggesting.
So, well, let's see if he's an outright socialist here, because if the only way to prevent corruption of the system is to do this kind of is to have people in power who don't necessarily want power or who aren't seeking it, those people then will have given up jobs that pay for their lives. How does he account for how that would be taken care of, if not for socialism?
Yeah, he doesn't actually account for that, but the analogy is the jury duty. So nobody gets paid for jury duty.
Right,
sometimes the decisions are pretty quick. Sometimes they take a lot longer. And yes, you can get out of jury duty in some cases because you really can't afford to be there. So it's not in that sense that he's giving us a perfect way of doing it. The book is about the new hatred of democracy. And part of the hatred is that we've eliminated the intent of democracy in the first place, which was the coming together for a common good, to determine and identify the common good in any particular situation. When you start throwing in individual, personalized, not so much preferences, but benefits, you're corrupting that right off the bat.
This would make for a great debate with a libertarian or an objectivist, an Ayn Randian, because they're diametrically opposite in philosophy. Ayn Rand believes that the best thing for society is for people to be as selfish as possible at all times.
Yes, they would. I believe he would be very much against that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't really make sense to me, because there's a lot more to life than being. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so. Yeah, so that's how they've managed to switch it all over from totalitarianism to democracy. It's the evils of totalitarianism are now foisted upon the democratic expression of the people, and the democratic expression of the people are being diverted in a different direction. Rather than actually looking for the common good, they're looking for the individual self-interest, and that's making its way into that is in its essence in politics as it is right now, which just makes it worse and worse. And so we have to pass more and more restrictive laws on politicians, not to do things that should be common sense not to do in many cases, but because we're self-interested, we don't always see that.
True.
So if you do not, so one of the tests that he puts out here is real democracy is viewed as criminal in our world today, because real democracy has the option of changing the system, its privileges, and the end or role of government. If you don't have those options, you're not really in a democracy.
If you're not given the option to change things dramatically.
Yes.
Now.
Yes.
What do you think he would have to say over the Brexit vote? Now, that was a democratic vote given to the people that the elites didn't think was going to go the way it did at all. Mm-hmm. They thought it was going to strengthen their position. A
referendum. I don't think he speaks too much about referendums, and part of the reason is that
But it's still an example of democracy going against what the elites and the establishment had.
So, in that sense, yes, but that's not what he means by democracy. So again, just because you vote on something doesn't make it a democracy for it. That's an atavism of democracy. It's characteristic or a procedural function of democracy. Remember, he talks about it as being coming together in equality. Right. The equality part is that one vote part, to find the common good. So the question, insofar as the Brexit vote was looking for the common good, then it might have been a democratic affair. But chances are that that's not really, it's not usually an either or. A democratic process, finding the common good is not an either or. It's very rarely, I should say, an either or. It often requires reframing and rethinking things through, and that is often, and the point of democracy, as he's suggesting, is that when you come together to do that, you don't have that selfish interest. So if you had like a big beef with Brussels trade laws or something like that, that's a self-interested thing. At the same time, if you feel that popular sovereignty, as expressed by the Queen in England, is a good thing, you're going to go another way. Is that really the common good? That's where the discussion comes in, and it's often not something that can be decided on a whim. It's like a trial in a sense. His notion that it's like a jury duty is important. You have to actually listen and study the issue. And since not everybody can do that, the elected officials, or maybe I shouldn't say elected officials, the chosen officials that are democratically put in place, are the ones who do that.
Right, it's a responsibility
Yes.
given to you, either in jury duty or it's a big responsibility.
Yes, it is.
Either to get justice right or governing right in Jacques' world.
Exactly. And the idea of like career politician or even 4-year terms like we have here on city council, I think would not be what he's referring to. He doesn't get into the specifics of it, but I suspect it might even be 1 or 2 decisions that these people would be forced to make, like guilty or not guilty, and punishment, full or minor or mitigation. I don't know. In the jury duty case, they only make one decision and they're disbanded, right? Something similar might be happening here.
So I wonder what he would say to the argument that, as society and modernity has progressed, society has gotten infinitely more complicated in that it requires, maybe someone would argue, the bureaucracy and the career politicians to actually be able to handle such a task, and that the rabble, given the opportunity, would just fail at this because they're not equipped.
So the aspect of the bureaucracy, I don't think he would be entirely against that. I think
he wouldn't be against
bureaucracy. I mean, the bureaucracy in a sense is needed in the more complex of society, yes. But in the governance role, that may not be, well, we're not doing it the right way, essentially. So, but then, yeah, he doesn't get too deep into the specifics at this point. he's just pointing out how democracy can be very different. And the hatred of democracy will be to try and obfuscate the principles that have been there in the past. And one of them, for example, is coming together in common good, is not what even we think of as democracy. And there's a few other ones as we continue down that we'll get to.
Okay, so where are we at next?
Okay, so I guess that would be the end of chapter 1. So just to recap chapter 1, moving from what we normally condemn as totalitarianism to the actions of individuals or grassroots actions, condemning that as totalitarian is where we are at now. What this leaves us is with the rule of the elites and competition among the elites. Now, chapter 2 delves into who are these elites and what legitimizes their roles. And he's got 2 classes of titles, shepherds and father figures, as legitimate, in real life, legitimating titles for power and control. And so he looks at, where is it here? Okay, so the 6 titles that he has are parents over children, so paternal powers, old over young, which is experience titles, master over slaves, political titles, highborn over those of no account, it's another type of nobility, I guess, or aristocracy. Those would be the father figure ones, and then there's 2 more, which he calls shepherd figures, the strongest over the weakest, and those who know over those who do not, or experts. At any time, in politics is the beginning when any one of these titles is competing with another one for the actual control. And So if you have somebody who knows, for example, an expert with credentials, telling somebody who doesn't know this is what's best for you, it's kind of paternalistic kind of attitude. But we get that all the time. Our city and the country are run, in a sense, by experts telling us what's best for us, in contradistinction to what the individuals might. Now, this might have a good thing, this might be a bad thing, but the point of the governance is that it needs to be justified to them.
Yeah.
Make their decisions based on that. But if their decisions are based on the selfish needs, then they're corrupted, right? So as staff are justifying their recommendations to governance, at the same time, the governors are under the impression that they want to get reelected, they want to please the people so they get their votes, they want to keep their job, they want to keep their pension, or they want to just get that other guy who annoyed them in the past and vote against them, or whatever reasons they're doing. They're not following the common good, they're following their own selfish personal interest. And
right.
as far as they're doing that, they're a corruption of, it's corrupting the bureaucracy. So these other titles say, well, I can do it better because these are legitimate reasons. Like if God gave me the right to do this because I'm master over my slaves, then I should keep that. Or if my father was a king, I'm going to be a king. Or if, in the case of the shepherd, I've got the degree, I know better than you. These are legitimating ones. In contradistinction to that, he points out that democracy throws a wrench in all that. So for him, democracy first and of all means this: anarchic government, one based on nothing other than the absence of every title to govern. The drawing of lots was a remedy to government comprised of a certain competence, that of individuals skilled in taking power through cunning. That's what he's saying. By taking your position as a result of a lot, you're not getting it because of cunning. And cunning is not necessarily something you want in government. You want somebody who's coming together for the common good. So I campaigned. I essentially was able to convince more people than my competitor to vote for me.
You had the cunning.
That's what he would be saying. I also had the resources. I probably had more money than my competitors in both cases. In a sense, I'm in the elite in that sense, and I beat out some other elites. He would look at that and say, that's not the way, that's not what democracy is about, because I am now self-interested, and I was just more cunning than they were.
Right. You're all just trying to climb over each other to reach the top of the ladder.
Yes, and I just was lucky and got successful in that sense. So because, it could have gone the other way, really. It could have. Other factors could have gone in there as well. So he sees, and now that I'm in the system, of course I want to have a pension at the end of this. Of course I want my paycheck. Of course I want to get reelected. Of course I like the feeling that I get when I walk into a room and say, "There's counselor," right? All of this stuff is a corruption from his perspective of what should be happening when we're discussing the common good. And I can see this. I mean, I see some people voting just to spite somebody else. Like, this is like the most obvious case where people are doing this just to spite. And we can see that in many of the speeches at the higher levels of government. It's more hidden at the local council level. You're doing things to spite people? That's not doing it for the common good, right? You're refusing to talk to other people? Really? That's not coming together for the common good. That's already a corruption of the democratic principle. So that's why he says, and if you can get something and you zing somebody for it, you're doing it definitely for the wrong reasons. We're all guilty of that.
It's interesting because if you present the idea, these anarchist or democratic principles to people, what about the idea of everybody being in charge of their own lives, sort of, or at least having the option to through this lottery ideal. I mean, that's one way to do it. They would say, well, they look at politics today and say, well, that's disgusting. I don't want any part of that. It seems terrible. So the current fake false democracy has kind of made the idea of more democracy gross to the average person.
Yes.
They hate it.
And that's part of the difference between what he calls equality and a certain lack of equality. So remember, he says people are coming together in equality to determine what is good and bad, or the common good. But the fact that we're not equal means that the cunningness gets in there. So if you have any one of those 6 first titles, you're going to see this as a scandal. He says that. In fact, he says, this is looked at as a scandal if you happen to have any of the 6 titles. In my words here, Democrats would choose chance over father and shepherd figure. So a real democratic person chooses chance.
So that, right? I mean, so then it's both versions of the understanding of the word anarchy, because the way the elites understand anarchy is chaos, right? Mm-hmm. And by this definition here, he's talking about we are willing to risk some chaos in order. Risk chance. That's chance, right?
So from the elite's perspective, yes, they call it risk, they call it chance, they call it chaos, but he doesn't see it that way. Because there is a bureaucracy, they are still running things until they get different direction. So it's the change of the top that becomes chaotic, and of course it's chaotic if they're in the top and they realize they're not going to be there because somebody else is going to get the chance. Right? So it's yes and a no to that. Good government, he says, good government is government by those who do not desire to govern. That's where he points out that if you're campaigning for it, if you want the job, you're not qualified. It's only when you don't want it that you're willing to come and look at the best thing to do. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be there. And if you're depending on titles, so if you've always said, I'm an expert, I should be able to do this better than anybody else, you're going to see this as a scandal, because you look at some of the people around you and you think, how did they survive, right? You can think that. If you do that, by the way, you're an elite. Because people can survive just as well in different ways than you do. But you're going to start imposing certain values because you can, and because it's self-interested. And that's the corruption that he's talking about. He wants to get rid of that. And in order to get rid of that, you can't really pay politicians.
So what? Okay, so that's his philosophy of he's outlined his philosophy of democracy, sort of. But what does he have to say about the kind of Jordan Peterson-esque take on hierarchy, and that the socialists are wrong and the anarchists are wrong because no matter what you do, humans are innately tend towards hierarchy in any society, in any civilization, because that's what men will ultimately go for anyway.
So at the top of the hierarchy, I think we got right in our society. At the top of the hierarchy is a governance structure that is bigger than the top of the pyramid. So there's one person at the top of the city, the CAO, but she reports to 13 people in a sense, council. That I think is a good thing, and I think that hierarchy is probably democratic in a sense, because we're supposed to be coming there as equals, one vote each. We all have we follow the same rules. Allegedly, that's not always the case. I've noticed that the rules are bent in certain favors and against others in many cases. But the principle seems to be good. It's corrupted because the people who are in there have been put in there through the wrong processes. Again, competitive elections. And the competition in the elections is the campaigning, which corrupts everything. The payment that goes with it, the promise of a pension, the status that goes with it. All of these things contribute to the corruption of democracy.
Yep.
So I guess I answered your question about the hierarchy. I suspect there are lots of hierarchies that are absolutely necessary, but it's not clear to me that all the ones that we have are in fact necessary.
Well, he specifically mentions, parents over children.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we did miss that. Okay, so one of the problems with in our world today, as a result of introducing the selfishness into governance, is that all legitimate power dynamics become questioned. So, if we look at parents and we think that they should be entirely selflessly looking after their kids, but we also know and we have accepted our world today in which we're all selfishly seeking out our things, so our own best interest. So we look at parents that are too good to their kids and wonder, are they abusing them some other way? Or we wonder, why is that teacher so close to that student? Right? Is there something else? And we instinctively think of sexual assault or something like that, or sexual manipulation or something like that.
Because we assume everybody is self-interested.
Exactly, and everybody's interested in sex, they say. So we treat that with suspicion. So he looks at these legitimate power dynamics, teacher, student, parent, child, boss, employee, and says they become suspect because of the self-interestedness that is going into them. So some of these are very legitimate, but they're becoming delegitimized by this corruption of democracy.
So the actual legit hierarchies are because of the individualized way we've been programmed to think about democracy, are undermining those hierarchies that parent over child, teacher over student.
Yes, those legitimate ones in our society. So, yeah. And in many cases, it's also justified because as a society, we've accepted that public servants are self-interested and they have a right to be self-interested within certain bounds. So for me, in my case, there's very specific guidelines of conflict of interest. But some of the more important ones are not there. So again, I'm concerned with my pension, getting reelected, all that kind of stuff that has essentially corrupted it, are not considered part of my conflict of interest. He's saying that yes, they should be. So yes, if I receive a big bribe, a big ton of money, that's egregious even in our society, and it would be egregious in his world too. But the fact that I'm getting a wage from the city makes it okay in our society. It wouldn't make it okay in his society.
So it's an incomplete kind of code of ethics.
Well, according to him, it sounds like it's not incomplete. It's just getting worse. So, yeah, we might look at it from our perspective. Yeah, we see examples of really egregious violations of the codes. So we make newer laws about that. That's going to continue forever. But if we had just started off at the beginning where we don't actually need that because people don't want to have this position, we wouldn't need any of that.
All right, is that it?
That's pretty much it for the introduction and first two chapters. Next week in 2 weeks, we'll do the last two chapters.
Okay. FYI, your microphone. It's the people in chat are still. It's like tinny or something. It sounds electrical, like it's not in all the way, or there's something.
It's the same microphone I had before, and it's on my computer. Sorry.
Yeah, well,
maybe if I take
probably...
this out. Would this be better?
Whoa. No, that's worse.
Okay.
There's some sound in your room or something. I don't know. Oh. Speak now?
Hi.
That's much better. Maybe not.
Okay. Well, I can hear that the fan on my computer is running. That might be part of it.
Okay, so it's probably the electric socket or whatever is too close to other things going on, other electrical parts like your fan. Oh well. It is what it is. Is there a microphone output on your computer?
I don't think so. It's a pretty cheap computer.
Is it a laptop?
It's a laptop. No, there's only one jack.
Only one Jack. Well, all right, I guess we're stuck with that one then.
Maybe I should get one on this instead.
On what?
Get one on this.
If that's possible. All right. Well, thanks for this.
My pleasure.
It was good. This is Chad is lucky he didn't have to read some of these sentences. They're very long and difficult to understand. So we should
you want me to read one of them?
Sure.
Want me to read one of these? Let's see. Where was that really difficult one we had?
Oh my God! There's one with like parentheses and it goes on and oh wait, is it second page? Yeah, it's like 5 lines down. In other words.
In other words, 5 lines down.
Is that? It might be your sentence though. I don't know. Or actually, no. There's one long one on the second page at the very top. It's like 4 lines long.
Okay. First, to reduce democracy to a form of society. Second, to make this form of society identical to the reign of the egalitarian individual by grouping up. Yeah, there was another one. Yeah, I had to put some ellipses in here. Okay, wait, maybe it's at the very bottom here. Oh, the Hedro Trophy one.
Oh, God.
Okay, the criticism about democracy's criminal tendencies is therefore correct on one point. Democracy signifies a rupture with the order of kinship. Oh, no, that's a small sentence. It just, the quote was longer.
Oh, well, whatever. We'll find it next time.
Fair enough.
All right. Thanks. We'll chat next time.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. Okay.
All right. Have a good night. Thanks again.
Have a good night. Cheers. Bye, chat.